I am a huge fan of the novel. It was one of my favorite novels. I remember reading it a long time ago. And a couple years ago, when I was at Barnes & Noble, I actually stumbled across the novel again, and it just dawned on me that there was no really good, thematic, dark, Frankenstein-themed game on the market. Nothing that really was, true to the source material. Everything was more about the movie, and they usually took more of a humorous approach, to the material, or tongue-in-cheek, and it had the flat head and the bolts, the big green guy. But Mary Shelley's Frankenstein was very different. It was a very articulate monster. Learned French. It was very terrifying and very, very dark. And I thought, this could be, a really cool, addition to, the game space if I could pull it off. So that kind of got me thinking. So I picked up the book, started reading it, and that's kind of how it began. The idea started coming, that would eventually become Abomination. I didn't always have in mind, the way I approach game design is I don't really try to force any kind of mechanism. I don't work from the mechanics and then find theme. It's like I go from the experience first, what do I want my players to feel? What is the story? And then the mechanisms kind of present themselves, just like, this makes sense, So when I started imagining the game, that's when the worker placement was actually one of the first things that just seemed to make sense. It's like you go out there, you get the bodies, that's what you do in real life. If you want to build a monster, right, you go out and you get the bodies. That felt like worker placement, then other aspects of the game just sort of came about because, how can you bring that experience to life with the gameplay, and then certain mechanisms suggest themselves, and I just kind of, went from there. So I'm glad that, the worker placement was kind of decided early on, because everything else kind of built around that. That became the core aspect of the game, and then I just started building on it. There's lots of different cool things going on. I don't know if it's a mechanic per se, but one of my favorite features of the game is the idea that the resources you get from the different places in Paris decompose, because I thought that was kind of a neat aspect of the game that was different from other games. Usually you go out and you collect your resources. They stay that way, until you use them. In this game, they don't stay that way. They start rotting, just like flesh would rot. So if you don't use them, you lose them, and eventually you have to throw them away. And I thought that was a kind of a cool little thing that I hit upon right away. And I thought, that was like something that I thought about that really excited me. So that was probably one of my favorite features. I don't know if that's really considered a mechanic. It just kind of happens after you do the thing. But that one, and also I would say if I had a second thing, it'd be the whole narrative aspect. The idea that the creature's visiting your lab and how that creates, and how he treats you is representative of how you're playing the game. So if you're doing well, rewards you. If you're not doing well, he punishes you. So that was also another feature of the game that I thought was cool. I did a lot of the writing for this game. Worked on a lot of these encounters, but Plaid Hat has a great writer in Mr. Bistro, and we collaborated on this. So together we came up with a lot of cool ideas. But probably one of my favorite ideas that I came up with was one of the ones where the creature visits you, and he doesn't like what you're doing. He doesn't think you're doing good enough. So he kills one of your assistants. These are one of your little meeples, and which kind of sucks because you lose that one meeple to place. But the good side is you actually get to convert that meeple into parts. So suddenly you have all these resources available, very fresh. So it was kind of a cool little thing where, oh man, I lost an action, but hey, I got this thing. So it kind of worked out. So I thought it was thematic, but also kind of interesting, and ultimately didn't hurt the player too bad. I never got nervous to pitch it because I never actually pitched it. This game, it wasn't really, I was not at a place where I was gonna pitch it anytime soon. I was just working on the game and iterating on it. And it was only like the third iteration of the game when I showed it to Plaid Hat, and it just kind of came about unexpectedly. I was actually taking the prototype to BGG Con, and the very first day, setting up in the big open gaming hall, I was just setting up to just rope in random players just to get some more plays in, to keep tweaking the game. And the first guy to come to the table and want to play was Colby Dock, from Plaid Hat. He was the founder and the studio manager. And so I was nervous when he showed up because I wasn't really ready to show the game to any publisher, and I never really thought too much strategically about who the publishers would be at that point. I wasn't really there. But when he showed up, I was like, okay, this is happening. I'm showing it to someone, and I'm not gonna get a second chance to make a first impression. So I was a little nervous from that standpoint, but luckily that play actually went really well. And when Colby was finished playing it, he was like, he gave me that little look, like, like, oh, there's something here, and he had some suggestions for the game, some ideas to kind of streamline it. And yeah, he told me that if I, wanted to make some of those suggested changes, that he wouldn't mind seeing it again. So that's kind of how the journey began with Plaid Hat. I never actually got around to pitching to publishers because he kind of swooped in early and saw the game when it was in its early state, and just kind of helped me develop and shepherd it from that point forward. That's a tricky one because I didn't look to movies when I was making this game. I was more thinking about the book. But when you think about the movies based on this mythos, there are movies that are more for the entertainment, then there's the ones that are more true to the book. There's really only one movie that kind of somewhat adheres to the novel, and that would be the Kenneth Branagh movie that came out in the early 90s. It was called Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. It's not my favorite one though. It was so melodramatic. I appreciate that they tried to make it somewhat like the book, so that's cool. Like if you're gonna do a book report without reading the book, that's the one you want to watch, not the one that came out in the 30s. But I would say the original ones, the original monster movies with Boris Karloff are probably my favorite. There was like a trilogy there. There was Frankenstein, Bride of Frankenstein, Son of Frankenstein. I would say Bride of Frankenstein out of those three was probably my favorite. Just got the cool hair going on, and it's just fun to watch. It really holds up. Considering when it was made, and you got to give some credit to young Frankenstein as well. That's a fun one. Too scary? Then you're probably right. It's not for you. You can take one look at this game and you just know it's like, okay, it's a little gross. There's some body parts. People missing jaws. It's dark. There's no attempt to lighten that, with the humor, and that makes you feel a little queasy or uncertain. You don't want to show it to your small children, then that's cool. It's like for everyone who has that attitude, there's another person who's like, oh my God, they made it just the way I wanted it. Finally a dark game. So I would say fine. There's games for everyone. And there's a game for you out there, and maybe this one's not yours, but I'm happy that people at least consider it.